Game 3 didn't feel like a playoff showdown. It felt like a courtroom drama where the scoreboard was just the final verdict. 17,000 fans packed at the Gainbridge Fieldhouse expecting to watch a battle of talent. Indiana's rising stars against the defending champs from Las Vegas. What they got instead was something that had the entire building buzzing with frustration. Whistles, endless free throws, and a game that felt as if it was being decided everywhere except on the hardwood. From the very first quarter, there was this strange energy in the air. The kind you can't quite put your finger on, but everyone feels. Aaliyah Boston and Lexie Hull were throwing their bodies into the paint, contesting every rebound, and somehow the calls kept going the other way. Every bump on Indiana was a foul. Every shove from Vegas, play on. By halftime, you could feel the tension rippling through the seats, like the whole arena was asking the same question. Are we really watching the game or watching the refs decide it? And here's where it gets even crazier. While the whistles dominated the night, the league's biggest star, Aaliyah Wilson, was ice cold. One basket in the first half. One. For nearly 3 quarters, she couldn't buy a bucket, yet the aces were still right there in the game. That's when the crowd started to sense it wasn't going to be about who played better, it was going to be about who survived the officiating. The ending left Fever fans fuming. Online, hashtags like "stolen at the whistle" started popping up within minutes of the buzzer. Clips of ignored challenges, questionable fouls, and stunned faces on the Indiana bench began trending overnight. What should have been remembered as Lexie Hull's gutsiest performance of the season turned into a debate about fairness that had sports talk shows lighting up the next morning. That's why Game 3 wasn't just another playoff loss. To Indiana, it felt like they didn't just play the aces, they played the refs too, and lost. But was it really stolen, or did Vegas simply know how to work the chaos better than anyone else? That's the question hanging over this series as we head into Game 4. And the answer might change how fans see both of these teams for a long time to come. The box score says the Las Vegas Aces took Game 3. But if you were in that building or even just watching from your couch, you know it didn't feel like a win. It felt like a sigh of relief from a team that never truly controlled the game. For most of the night, the defending champs looked rattled. Their franchise star, Aaliyah Wilson, the player who's supposed to dominate the paint and set the tone, couldn't buy a rhythm. Her first shot of the game was a smooth three-pointer that made it seem like the old Wilson was about to take over, but then nothing. For the next 2 quarters, she was stuck at just one made basket. She settled for awkward fadeaways, got pushed off her spots by Aaliyah Boston, and wore a look of frustration that you don't often see from a 2-time MVP. By the end of the night, she had scored just 13 points on 20 attempts. A stat line that would raise eyebrows for any starter, let alone one of the league's faces. The Fever's defense had done its job. They had bottled up the most dangerous player in the series. Normally, when you shut down the other team's superstar, you walk away with a win. But not that night. Vegas didn't surge ahead because Wilson suddenly caught fire. They didn't break Indiana by sheer talent or strategy. They crept back in because everything else, the whistles, the timing of calls, the momentum-killing stoppages, tilted in their favor. Each trip to the line chipped away at Indiana's lead while draining the energy out of the Fever's crowd. That's what made the victory feel so hollow. The Aces didn't beat Indiana at Indiana's best. They survived because the game stopped looking like basketball. And that's a bitter pill for any fan to swallow. Even Becky Hammon, the Aces' own coach, hinted at the irony in her post-game comments, complaining that Wilson only got to the free throw line once in 38 minutes. The numbers show her frustration, but they also expose the contradiction. Vegas had been living at the line all series long. It's hard to call that a statement when your star struggles, your team depends on free throws to stay afloat, and the opposing crowd leaves the arena feeling robbed. That's why fans and analysts alike started describing Game 3 as less of a triumph and more of an escape. But the controversy around the whistle was just the beginning. Because buried underneath all that outrage was the real story of the night. The grit of a player who refused to let her team fold. From the moment the ball went up in Game 1, something felt off. Indiana's brand of basketball is physical, not dirty, just tough. They body up in the paint, they fight for every rebound, they challenge drives at the rim, and instead of being praised for strong playoff defense, every bump seemed to send an Aces player to the line. That pattern didn't fade as the series went on. It grew louder. By Game 2, the whistles were practically a soundtrack, stopping the Fever's rhythm every few possessions. Whenever Indiana built a bit of momentum, a stop, a transition bucket, the crowd swelling with noise, another foul call would break the flow and hand Vegas 2 easy points. Fever coach Stephanie White even admitted afterward that it was nearly impossible to find an offensive rhythm when her players were constantly walking back to line up for free throws. Game 3 was when that tension finally boiled over. Midway through the third quarter, Aaliyah Boston picked up what looked like a clean defensive stand on Jackie Young. White immediately signaled for a coach's challenge. The whole Fever bench was ready. The Gainbridge crowd was on its feet, waiting for the review that could swing the game back their way. But the review never came. The officials simply moved on, ignoring the challenge request. Seconds later, Chelsea Gray drilled a corner 3. The Fever's 6-point cushion disappeared in a blink, and the entire building erupted, not in celebration, but in disbelief. Clips of that sequence flooded social media before the quarter was even over. Fans slowed down the footage, highlighting the ignored challenge, the contact that went uncalled, and then the shot that flipped the momentum. Analysts posted breakdowns showing a string of similar moments. Wilson leaning in with elbows that drew no whistle, Fever defenders getting whistled for barely brushing a screen, flops that somehow earned free throws. It wasn't just the imbalance of calls, it was the timing. Every key Fever run seemed to be interrupted by a foul that stopped the clock and handed Vegas free points. And every no call in Vegas's favor felt like another door slammed in Indiana's face. For a team trying to claw its way back into the series, that's devastating, not only on the scoreboard, but in the players' confidence. Inside Gainbridge, the fans turned from loud supporters to a restless storm. They booed with every questionable whistle, waved their arms at the refs, and showered the Aces shooters with noise each time they stepped to the line. You could feel the frustration building like static electricity, waiting for a spark. That spark came with the trending hashtag #StolenAtTheWhistle. By the next morning, highlight reels of those controversial moments were everywhere. Elbows that looked obvious but drew nothing, blocked shots ruled as fouls, a missed challenge that shifted the game's tide. Whether you agreed or not, one thing was undeniable. The officiating had become the central character in a playoff series that was supposed to be about the players. And as the argument over the whistle raged on, something incredible was getting lost in the noise. The sheer grit of Lexie Hull, a player who nearly stole the spotlight back from all that chaos. While the crowd seethed over the whistles and the Fever tried to hold their lead together, one player quietly decided that the night wouldn't be remembered only for controversy. That player was Lexie Hull. She wasn't even supposed to be a factor in Game 3. Hull had aggravated her back in the first game of the series, an injury that usually sidelines a shooter who thrives on mobility. Her status for Game 3 was officially questionable. At shoot-around, she looked stiff, favoring one side as she moved through warm-ups. Reporters whispered that she'd probably log just a few minutes to spell the starters, if she saw the floor at all. But once the game tipped off, it was obvious Hull had no interest in being a background character. From her first possession, she attacked rebounds like they belonged to her, fighting past taller defenders, grimacing through the pain in her back. Whenever the Fever needed a spark, a big bucket to answer a Vegas run, or body to dive for a loose ball, Hull was the one who threw herself into the play. Her stat line tells the story of a veteran star, not an injured role player. 16 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal, all while shooting an efficient 6 for 10 from the floor and knocking down 3 momentum-saving threes. Each triple felt like a lifeline, the kind of shot that stops a crowd from going silent and forces the opponent to rethink their defense. But the numbers don't capture the grit. Cameras caught her face mid-possession, twisted in discomfort, yet she kept battling in the paint, boxing out players who stood inches taller. She dove on the hardwood for 50-50 balls, slapped passes out of the air on defense, and sprinted the floor to keep plays alive that should have been dead. Every time the Aces threatened to pull away, Hull's hustle dragged the Fever right back into the fight. What made it even more remarkable was the timing. One of those threes tied her to a franchise playoff record for most three-pointers across 2 games, 8 in total. Something almost no one expected from a player who entered the night on an injury watch list. Her 16 points weren't just a personal best for her postseason career, they became the emotional heartbeat of Indiana's effort. For the fans in Gainbridge Fieldhouse, Hull's performance struck a chord. They could see she was laboring through pain but still refusing to back down. Every rebound she snagged over Aces forwards drew a roar. Every dive on the floor brought the crowd to its feet. In a game where the officiating felt like a brick wall, Hull's relentlessness became proof that the Fever still had fight left. That's why so many people felt robbed by the way Game 3 ended. On a night when Hull delivered the grittiest performance of her career, all anyone could talk about afterward were the whistles. Her effort deserved the spotlight. Instead, it got buried under controversy. And that contrast says a lot about both teams. Indiana, powered by grit and resilience. Las Vegas, surviving in spite of its superstars' struggles. Speaking of superstars, the night also revealed a different battle entirely. The one that raged quietly in the paint between A'ja Wilson and Aaliyah Boston. Beneath all the noise about the whistles, there was another story unfolding. A story that hardcore basketball fans couldn't take their eyes off. Aaliyah Boston versus A'ja Wilson. It was the kind of matchup the league had been waiting for all season. On one side, Wilson, two-time MVP, the face of the defending champions, known for dominating the block with her length and footwork. On the other, Boston, still early in her pro career, but already carving out a reputation as one of the most fundamentally sound post defenders in the game. In Game 3, Boston didn't just hold her ground, she owned her space. Every time Wilson tried to set up on the low block, Boston's stance was there first. Low, wide, balanced, hands straight up. She made every catch a chore and every move feel crowded. Instead of her usual power drives and smooth spin hooks, Wilson kept getting nudged just enough off balance to settle for awkward fadeaways. For a player who normally lives in the paint, it was like being pushed into unfamiliar territory. The stat sheet told the story. Wilson opened the night with a confident three-pointer, her only basket of the entire first half. By the break, she was just 1 for 12 from the field. She finished with 13 points on 20 shots, a percentage you almost never associate with an MVP. Boston didn't do it by blocking every shot or racking up highlight reel swats. She did it by making Wilson uncomfortable on every possession, denying angles, contesting without fouling, and keeping her body between Wilson and the rim. That's the type of defense that rarely makes a viral clip, but wins respect in locker rooms. What made Boston's performance even more impressive was that she carried a double workload. While she was shutting down the league's most feared scorer on one end, she still poured energy into Indiana's offense, battling for deep post position, setting hard screens, kicking out to shooters like Hull, and forcing the Aces' defense to collapse on her. Her presence kept the Fever's interior game alive, even as the whistle slowed the pace. Yet outside Indiana, the narrative barely gave her credit. Some outlets focused on Wilson's off night, without mentioning why it happened. Others praised the Aces' depth for stepping up as their superstar struggled. But anyone who watched closely saw the truth. Boston was the reason Wilson looked mortal. That one-on-one duel set the tone for the rest of the series. If Boston could limit Wilson again, the balance of power might tilt back toward Indiana, especially with the Fever's home crowd ready to turn every Wilson miss into a roar. But that same battle also exposed Vegas's vulnerability. If their MVP couldn't get loose inside, the champions suddenly looked beatable. And as if the matchup itself weren't intense enough, the tension off the court added another layer. Because even before the next tip-off, the coaches started their own psychological chess match in the press conferences. Even before the next tip-off, the series was already heating up, and not on the court. The spotlight shifted to the microphones at the post-game pressers, where the coaches began playing their own chess match in front of the cameras. Becky Hammon, the Aces championship-winning coach, stepped up to the podium after Game 3 looking more relieved than triumphant. Instead of celebrating a 2-1 series lead, she started voicing concerns about the physicality of Indiana's defense and hinted that in Game 4, the whistles might start favoring the home team. For a fan base that had just watched 3 games tilted toward Vegas at the foul line, that comment landed like a punchline. Fever supporters saw it as an attempt to plant a seed with the officials, a public warning to watch for Indiana's contact. It felt almost like reverse psychology, a way of saying, if we don't get the calls next time, it's because the ref swung too far the other way. On the other side, Stephanie White stayed mostly measured, but couldn't hide her frustration. She spoke about how hard it was for her team to find a rhythm when the game kept stopping for free throws. Her message was quieter, but carried a sharper edge. Just let them play basketball. That back and forth shifted the tone of the series. It wasn't just a clash of rosters anymore. It had become a battle of narratives. Each coach tried to influence how the story would be told heading into Game 4. One warning about rough Fever defense, the other pleading for a fair whistle. Meanwhile, the Fever's real advantage was already waiting for them back home, the Gainbridge Fieldhouse. 17,000 Indiana fans were expected to fill every seat, and if Game 3 taught Vegas anything, it's that Gainbridge doesn't sit quietly when it smells injustice. The arena is known for being loud, but during these playoffs, it's felt more like a living wall of noise that rises and crashes with every possession. That noise does more than rattle free throw shooters. It changes the energy of the game, speeding up Indiana's fast breaks, making each stop on defense feel bigger than the last. When Aaliyah Boston muscles her way to an and one, or when Lexie Hull dives to save a possession, the roar inside Gainbridge feels like it could shake the rafters. Even seasoned players on Vegas's roster have admitted that playing in Indy's building is no fun. Hammond herself conceded earlier in the year that her squad just hasn't thrived there. Heading into Game 4, that noise becomes part of the Fever's strategy. If they can channel the crowd's energy, use it to fuel their defense, to push the tempo, to make every Aces turnover feel like a disaster, they force Vegas to play outside its comfort zone. For the first time in the series, it wouldn't be the whistle that controlled the game. It could be the roar of the home crowd. All of those elements, the subtle press conference jabs, the media narratives, the looming roar of 17,000 fans, set the stage for a matchup that feels less like just another playoff game and more like a fight for survival. By the time the Fever walked back onto the hardwood for Game 4, the air inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse felt heavier, almost electric, like the minutes before a summer thunderstorm. This wasn't just another playoff matchup. For Indiana, it was do or die. One more loss meant their season was over. One more loss, and the whole fight they'd waged, through injuries, through hostile whistles, through 3 long games of frustration, would end right there on their home floor. They didn't talk about revenge in interviews, but you could see it in the way they warmed up, the extra snap on passes, the focused faces at the free throw line, the way Boston stretched near mid-court, staring straight at the Vegas bench. The Fever weren't here just to survive. They were here to prove that the previous game's result wasn't who they really were. For the crowd, the night felt almost personal. Fans came early, dressed in navy and yellow, waving rally towels before the national anthem even started. Every highlight clip from Game 3's controversial calls had been replayed on local news all week. By tip-off, 17,000 voices were ready to turn that frustration into a wall of sound. The first time an Aces player missed a shot, the roar was deafening. When Boston got her first defensive stop on Wilson, the building shook as if Indiana had just won the series. Indiana's blueprint for survival was simple but ruthless. Feed Aaliyah Boston early and force Wilson to defend without fouling. Push the tempo so Vegas's half-court defense couldn't settle in. Get Kelsey Mitchell going right away after her quiet Game 3, because when she heats up, the Fever's whole offense opens up. And lean on Hull's spark again, even if she was still feeling that back pain. Every possession had weight. Each successful stop wasn't just 2 points denied. It felt like the Fever were reclaiming pieces of their season that had been stripped away by bad luck and bad whistles. For Vegas, the pressure was different. They were the champs, favored to advance, yet suddenly they looked uneasy. Jackie Young had shouldered the load in Game 3, but could she keep doing it if Wilson stayed bottled up by Boston's defense? The Aces' depth, which looked solid at home, now had to survive in the teeth of a hostile crowd that roared at every mistake. You could feel the series pivoting on a knife's edge. If Hull could summon another gutsy performance, dive for rebounds, knock down the open threes,
And if Mitchell rediscovered her scoring groove, Indiana had a real shot to drag the Aces into deep water. If Wilson failed to break free again, Vegas might be forced to rely on role players to carry them, a gamble no defending champion likes to make on the road. The Fever weren't just fighting for a single win. They were trying to reclaim respect, to show that the Aces' earlier victories looked dominant only because of whistles and timing, not because Indiana was outclassed. A victory in Game 4 wouldn't just keep their season alive, it would flip the narrative of the entire series.
That's why every blocked shot, every Mitchell three-pointer, every Hull hustle play drew a roar that sounded less like applause and more like a declaration. We're not done yet. Game 4 became more than a battle for the scoreboard. It was a showdown about control of the pace, control of the series, and maybe even control of the story that had dominated the first 3 games. And as the tension in Gainbridge reached a fever pitch, one thought kept echoing above the noise. If Indiana could win this night, they wouldn't just extend their season, they'd expose just how human the defending champs could look when the whistle wasn't on their side. Game 4 was never just about staying alive on the bracket. For Indiana, it was about rewriting the story that had haunted the first 3 games. A story of whistles, missed chances, and a superstar showdown that was buried under controversy. No matter how you saw it, one truth stood out. When the Fever stayed locked in and kept the game in their own hands, the Aces looked far less untouchable. Wilson's struggles, Boston's defense, Hull's toughness, they all proved that talent alone doesn't guarantee control. What controls a playoff series is momentum, confidence, and who keeps their composure when the stakes feel bigger than the scoreboard. The night in Gainbridge showed something else too. The power of a home crowd that refuses to sit quietly. Every roar, every gasp, every chant shook the floorboards and reminded Vegas that banners and past trophies don't win you new games. And that's what makes the next chapter so intriguing. If Indiana's young core can push a dynasty to the edge now, what happens when they return next season at full strength, with Caitlin Clark joining the lineup and Boston a year wiser? This Game 4 wasn't just a battle for survival. It felt like a glimpse of a rivalry that could define the next few years of the league. For fans, it's a reminder that the real story of this series wasn't written on the stat sheet or even on the scoreboard. It was written in the grit of players like Hull, in Boston's relentless defense, in the way an arena of 17,000 people turned frustration into fuel, and in the stubborn will of a team that refused to be quiet. So now the question lingers. Did the Aces escape, or did the Fever finally reveal the cracks in a champion's armor? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Indiana proved they belong among the league's elite? And can they finish what they started next season? If you're backing them to keep fighting, type it loud. Let's go, Fever! However this series ends, one thing's clear. The whistle may influence the game, but the players and the fans will always drive the story.